everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my July wrap-up. I'm sitting outside on my deck, and I am going to have to wear my sunglasses because it is simply too bright out here for me to be looking at stuff and talking to you without my sunglasses. So I read a total of, and I've got stuff over here beside me, and that's why I might have to look over there, but I read a total of 10 books in the month of July, and I'm just going to try to run through them as quickly as possible. If this video runs on too long, I might have to divide it up into two pieces, but let's see how it goes, shall we? The first book I finished in July was an essay collection called These Precious Days by Patchett. I listened to this as an audiobook from the library, and I was motivated to pick this up at that time because of Doris had been reading it, had been recommending it to me, and I had previously read one of Patchett's other essay collections, something about love, marriage, something, and really enjoyed it. And These Precious Days is essays from her life in a sort of previous, I'm in a sort of similar vein. They're about relationships, about family, about her life as a bookstore owner, and it's just really, she is such an excellent essay writer. And if you like that sort of style of essay that's about somebody's personal life, but is also sort of about a broader topic at the same time, I would highly recommend that you check out These Precious Days by Patchett. And I believe she reads it herself, if I'm remembering correctly. It was really well done. So that was a really good way to start off the month. The second book I read was a reread, and that was Persuasion by Jane Austen. I buddy read this with Britta Bowler because July was Jane Austen July, and I like to reread or read something by Jane Austen. I've now read all of her published works, so mostly rereading at this point. And Persuasion is my second favorite Jane Austen, the first being Pride and Prejudice. I really appreciate Persuasion because Anne Elliot, the main character, is an older woman in quotes, because she's like in her late 20s at the time this book takes place. But when she was earlier, she was courted by a man named Captain Wentworth, and her family basically persuaded her not to marry him because he didn't really have any prospects. She came from an aristocratic family, though while not wealthy any longer, had certain standing in society, and they felt that Captain Wentworth wasn't bringing any of that to the table. So he goes off and then, of course, makes his fortune as a captain and on the sea or whatever, and he comes back into the neighborhood 8 or 10 years later, and here is our heroine, Anne Elliot, still unmarried because, of course, she loved him. And it's how they come back together. And it's just, the dialogue is so well done. The societal commentary is so well done. And this book feels just more mature because the people involved are more mature. And Anne Elliot is just a fantastic character. So absolutely loved the reread of that one. The next book I completed was another buddy read, and that was Brooklyn by Colm Toibin, and I buddy read that with my friend Rachel. Rachel has an Instagram channel but does not do YouTube videos, and she's a great buddy reader, and she wanted to read that one, and I was interested, and I had never read any Colm Toibin before. So basically, Brooklyn is the story of a young woman from Ireland. It's historical fiction, and it takes place in the early part of the 20th century. Actually, it might be post World War II, and I can't remember for sure now, but it's like the first half of the 20th century. She basically is talked into immigrating to the United States from Ireland because there aren't many prospects for her in Ireland. Her family is poor, her father has died, her siblings, her sister is unmarried and has a job in the town, but there aren't many jobs available in the town, and her brothers have gone off to make their way in the world, and basically it's just her and her mother, and in order to provide her with what they think will be a better life, her mother and her older sister sort of make arrangements for her to go to America. So off she goes to New York, and she experiences the life as a shop girl in this part of the 20th century, and she begins to pursue educational opportunities, and she meets a young man. And it is basically just this coming of age story of this young woman in another country and sort of having to make her own way in the world without anybody there to guide her. I was really into this story. Like, this is not my normal type of fare, I would say, but I really loved this story so much. I really loved the descriptions of what life was like for an unmarried woman at this time period, and also like just like the day-to-day things that people experienced in an urban environment, like in a retail environment, like how department stores worked, how these boarding houses worked, like all of this stuff I really found fascinating. So I really loved the book, and I do look forward to reading the sequel to this. I think it's Long Island. I will be continuing on and reading that second book because I just absolutely loved Brooklyn. The next book I completed was One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar Akkad. This is a nonfiction book about basically the Israeli bombing of Palestine and the genocide that is currently happening in Palestine right now. And basically it's about... Omar Akkad is from Egypt originally and had moved to Canada when he was a young man, and currently lives in the United States as an adult. He's a journalist. He was trained as a journalist, and he began to cover sort of worldwide events, war correspondent type things as a young man, and had to start like trying to contend with how the Western world views these types of conflicts in the Middle East, and sort of try to deal with the world's attitude towards Muslims and Arabs in general, as an adult trying to succeed in the journalism field. And now he lives in America, and he's watching these events unfold in Israel, between Israel and Palestine, and he just can't believe how nobody wants to acknowledge what's really happening. Like, the media won't acknowledge it, the governments of Western countries won't acknowledge it, and they just basically continue their support of Israel without using their critical thinking skills in the way that they would maybe another government doing the exact same thing that Israel is doing. This is just fantastic. I would highly recommend this book to anyone. I think it really should be required reading for anyone trying to understand what is going on between Israel and Palestine today, and what the people of Palestine are trying to deal with, and adding on to that, what that's like for people of Arab descent to deal with, who are trying to live in the world as well. Really fantastic. I read Omar Akkad's novel American War some years ago and really enjoyed that as well. I think he really is an excellent author, but I would say that I even got along with his nonfiction better than his fiction, so highly recommend that one. I think it really is important, an important topic, and important for people to read that to get a full understanding of what's happening in the world today. The next book I completed was Abidans Gate by James S.A. Corey. This is science fiction, book number 3 in the Expanse series, and this series follows a spaceship captain named Jim Holden, and his spaceship, small crew, found family type of storyline, and in each book, they are usually somehow embroiled in interstellar politics, even though ostensibly all they do is run this small spaceship running cargo for different entities for profit. And in this case, their ship gets seized by one of the governments, and they basically get forced into doing something they don't want to do. So what has happened is this gate has formed at the edge of the universe, and the gate is, nobody knows what the gate is, nobody knows what happens when you go through the gate, and so all of the different governments involved, so you've got the government of Earth, the government of Mars, and then sort of this broader government, which I've forgotten the name of now, but like the Belter is basically the outside space area government. And the 3 different governments are sending representatives to the space beside this gate. And they're all going to sort of convene on this location and try to figure out what's going on. And so Jim Holden and his spaceship and his crew have to go to the same location, even though they don't want to, and try to deal with this alien entity. And plot ensues from there. And these are space opera type stories. They are a very good time if you like adventure stories set in space with a broadcast of characters that are very engaging. I think this is a great series to try. I really like the diversity of characters. There's usually some characters that are, disabled, or, their sexuality is different, or, there's just a variety of characters. It isn't just a plain vanilla type group of characters. And I really enjoy that aspect of the books as well. And I love the found family aspect of them. So that was a fun read. I then finished a fiction book called Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. I was buddy reading that one with Joe Smith, buddy reader extraordinaire. We had started reading that along with Sean from Sean Bree's Books sometime back last spring. Sean dropped out fairly early on, and Joe and I decided to continue on. So Praiseworthy is a book written by Alexis Wright, is an Aboriginal person from the country of Australia, and this is a book about a community of Aboriginals in like the northwest part of Australia. They live in this town called Praiseworthy. Praiseworthy has been impacted by this dome of dust and pollution that's sort of hovering over their town and causing like extremes of temperature and really bad breathing problems and all that sort of stuff that you would expect from a climate change induced weather event. And these Aboriginals are like trying to deal with it. They don't understand why the broader Australian white government isn't doing more for them, basically. And into this storyline comes our family, a main family of characters. Cosman Steele, who is the father, his wife Dance, their sons. They have two sons. Tommy Hawk is the younger son, and the older son is Aboriginal Sovereignty. And as you can tell just by the names of the characters, like they're characters in their storyline, but they're also stand-ins for broader concepts or ideals or values. And this is a satire, sort of a satire, a take on what it's like to be Aboriginal in the modern world. But also, the story of this family at the same time. So basically, Alexis Wright is writing this story that's sort of poking holes and poking fun at the way things are and what has been done to Aboriginals, but also telling the story of this family at the same time. And the story itself is very long. The book is extremely long, and is sort of told in this way that's very iterative. It's very circular. It keeps coming back to the same topics and themes. It is a challenging book to read, and I definitely highly recommend it to be read with buddies, with reading buddies, or in some kind of a discussion group, because there's so many topics that are being discussed, from climate change to Indigenous rights and sovereignty, to immigration, racism. All of these topics are being addressed, but in a humorous way and through this story that's told with magical realism elements and all of these things. So yeah, it's a complex story, but also like just dense. It's dense storytelling is what I would say. So recommended because it's from a viewpoint that we don't normally read about, a topic that's super important. It's very funny in places. It's certainly making fun of our culture, our influencer culture and social media and all that sort of thing, as well as some important topics that we all continue to deal with on a global basis. But definitely have somebody that you can talk to about it as you're reading it, because it's one of those books that you do better with it if you're reading it with someone else. Next book I completed was The Inland Island by Josephine Johnson. This was another buddy read. I read this one with Britta Bowler. I read a copy from Everand, and it is Josephine Johnson wrote the book in the late 60s, early 70s, and it is one of these books where she looks at the nature around her. She lives in Ohio. She looks at the nature around her through the seasons. So the book takes place over the course of a year, and she's ruminating on the land that she has purchased in Ohio, which they are sort of allowing to go back to its wild form. They aren't farming it any longer or like doing anything to develop it or anything. They're just letting it go back to nature. And so that part of the nonfiction book I really enjoyed, because I love that sort of thing. I like the discussion of nature, particularly in someone's backyard, and how they respond to it and what they see in different seasons and how that changes. I love all of that. She had some very good descriptions of what she was experiencing. But I will say, it was a little bit all over the place. There was a lot of her political thinking and her anger and frustration with things that were happening at the time. This was during Vietnam War and sort of end of civil rights movement. And she was very frustrated with a lot of the things that were happening in the United States at that time, which is understandable, but it just didn't, for me, it just didn't connect well all the time with what she was talking about with the nature aspect. So like, she seems very, and she is very upset and angry in a lot of the book. And then she would have these beautiful descriptions of nature, and it was like, they created a lot of dissonance for me. It just didn't always go together as well as I would have liked. So, that one, it wasn't as successful for me as I'd hoped that it would be. The next book I finished was Headstrong by Rachel Swaby. This is the book that I gifted to Doris when she was here visiting me at the end of July. And this is a nonfiction book of essays about 52 different women that contributed to science and who you may or may not have heard of. Like, there's famous people like Rachel Carson in there, but there are also like lesser known women who did things, or who either invented things or did scientific experiments and discovered things, or who created things in the world and maybe are lesser known for that. And the title of the book, Headstrong, is because it's about women that, didn't always conform with what was expected of them and pursued their passion and brought new knowledge to the world as a result of the work that they did. And I thought it was great. It was really awesome book. Each essay is like maybe 3 or 4 pages. All of these fantastic women that just had done these amazing things. I highly recommend that book if you're interested in women's history, women in science, women in fields that perhaps they aren't, especially back 100 years ago, weren't particularly known for operating within those fields. It's a really fantastic book for that. And then I finished, at the very end of the month, I finished Eisenhower and War and Peace by Jean Edward Smith. This is a biography of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the next president that I had to read in my presidential reading challenge. This was an excellent biography. I had read one other biography by this author previously, I think an FDR biography by him. And he does a very nice job of telling the story of somebody's life. I will say Eisenhower, I did not know very much about Eisenhower. I had never particularly been interested in Eisenhower just because, most of what I had known about him before focused on his military career. And, he was, career military, and then became president at the end of his military career. And just that, it didn't sound particularly interesting to me. But Eisenhower was very much a transitional president, in that he served for 2 terms. It was a peaceful 8 years that he was in power. He sort of bridged the divide between World War II and what came after World War II. And so he was really the last president to be in power in the United States, sort of straddling like the old era and then the new modern, what I would consider the new modern era. And so he had, the country really adored him. He had high approval ratings throughout his presidency, like pretty much his entire career. Everybody loved him. There were a few people that didn't, but as far as the public was concerned, they loved him. And that is really, unusual in the modern era, I would say. And it's interesting to read this book because he was not a perfect person by any means. And it reinforces this thinking that I have about presidents now, after having continued through this challenge now to President Eisenhower, that, we shouldn't glorify political leaders or presidents. Like, they all come with their own flaws. None of them are perfect. Some of them, most of them do some good things and bad things at the same time. Sometimes that balance is more out of whack one way or the other, depending on the president. But as far as Eisenhower goes, like, he did some good things, and people loved him while he was president, but he also had flaws, and he was not perfect. And there are certain aspects to his character that I really, gave him the side eye. But he also was a product of his times. And he also could have been a lot worse than he was. And after he became president, like, he was determined to keep the country out of war. And I think it's probably really good that we had him as president at the time, because this is when the Cold War was really ramping up, and other countries were getting nuclear capacities to, nuclear weapons. And had we had a different kind of president, each president has been offered the opportunity to use nuclear weapons, and Eisenhower was very firm in, like, no, we should never do that again. It should be last resort type of thing. It should not be brought out, because if we do, it's going to annihilate all of us. And so anyway, I'm like going into a lot of topics with Eisenhower that I don't need to for this review, but this was a very good biography. I do recommend it if you are also engaged in presidential biography reading. This author, Jean Edward Smith, is a good author to look for, and this particular biography was a good biography of Eisenhower. I did also complete Challenger by Adam Higginbotham in the month of July. That was the book that I read for the BookTube Prize, but I won't talk about that here. That is properly talked about in a video about all of the BookTube Prize books that I read in the last round. So that's it. Those are the books I read in July. I hope you found some good books to read in July too, and I will talk to you later.